Spiritual lessons from rock climbing. It was the third weekend of April, and as I said, we took 11 Pathfinders. Mrs. Corder and myself were the staff. We had full vehicles, full of luggage, full of Pathfinders. And let's see if we can get it to advance. What do you think, Tony? We met at a camp. It's run by the Union Gospel Mission. Our teen Pathfinders have helped volunteer at this camp to do projects for them for our teen mission trip in the past. It is located near Ford, Washington. So if you were on Highway 2 and you hit Reardon, you would head straight north. It's about 14 miles north of Reardon. It's sitting on the banks of the Spokane River, a beautiful setting. The weekend was full of spiritual highlights, spiritual aspects, and worship every morning and evening. This was our worship time together. You might recognize some of our kids there in the picture. They're enjoying their worship time. Songs of praise. Our guest speaker was a theology student from Walla Walla University, and she did an excellent job speaking on faith. Here we're gearing up, so one of the things they had to do was get gear, and their fees for the weekend paid for all the gear rental, the harness, the helmet, the devices for belaying, the shoes, and they're getting fitted for their rock climbing shoes. Once they had all their gear together, they were to take that with them the whole weekend. And those of you who went, raise your hands. If you were on the rock climbing event, raise your hands. I didn't ask your permission to share your pictures. Please forgive me. But if I get it slightly out of order, that's just the way we put it together. They're probably thinking, well, that's not when we got our shoes. That wasn't the first night. That was the second night, which is true. So on the rock climbing event, the first thing first is to get acquainted. And these are our whole group of girls. They had icebreaker activities and get to know each other, team building activities, establishing your name with people from all the clubs. There was about 2018 Pathfinders there. We were the largest group from Wenatchee. We were representing well, and we were thanked for that. It was a little bit less attended this year, probably because it was on Easter weekend. And it is also an Oshkosh year. But typically they can have 50 to 60 kids attend these teen events. The teen events have been going on now for more than 15 years, sponsored by Upper Columbia Conference. Here is one of the cabins of the camp that we stayed in. I'm going to be going back and forth to spiritual lessons and highlights from the trip, so don't doze off because you're going to miss something. Stay with me. Here's the chapel that we were meeting in. That's where we had our worships. Our Pathfinders in Upper Columbia Conference actually helped work on that chapel in the early 2000s. And we're gearing up to head out to the rock for the day. The rocks there were located along Long Lake. So this is a section of the Spokane River that's dammed up by Long Lake Dam. This is almost due west from Spokane, about 20 miles. And here I am, yes, I was there, overlooking the Long Lake from the top of one of the rocks that we were climbing on. And this young lady on our right was our speaker for the weekend from Walla Walla University, and the gentleman in the middle is one of our Pathfinders, Daniel. How it runs for the weekend, I just want to run you over this a little bit, is the kids show up. We had our team building, our icebreakers Friday evening. They get to know each other. And then Sabbath is spent learning the skills, learning the gear, learning the materials. And every station that they're at, they're given a spiritual application. The leaders there will have a Bible verse or two, and they'll challenge the Pathfinders then to think, how can this apply to you in a spiritual sense? Now, the setting was just gorgeous. There wasn't a sound of a vehicle to be heard. We were out in the woods on these rocks. We were overlooking the lake. It was a beautiful Sabbath day, and the weather was perfect. As you can see in the picture, not a cloud in the sky, and that's the way it was all weekend. It couldn't have been more perfect, and we thank the Lord for that. So Sabbath, that is what we're doing. We're learning to trust each other. We're learning to trust God and the spiritual aspect that can be provided in the different rock climbing experiences. Then on Sunday is when they do their rock climbs, and that's when they get into the climbing of the different routes and using the skills that they've learned on Friday and Sabbath. Now, they do earn the rock climbing honor. We had 9 out of 11 completed and 2 more that are close, but there were just a few things they weren't ready to commit to. The first round-robin activity for the groups, they broke them up into groups of 5, 6, 7 Pathfinders, and then they went around to these stations Sabbath morning to learn different things. And the first was trust. Picture stretched a little bit. They weren't quite that wide, but they had them standing up there on a rock, and if you've ever done the trust fall, you look away, and your catchers say, ready, and you put your hands across your chest, and you fall backwards, straight-legged. And even the biggest of the kids, including myself, was caught by our group. And it developed a trust, a faith. I'm going to pause in the story just a little bit and talk about trust and faith. In the Bible, the definition of faith is well described in Hebrews chapter 1. If you want to go there to remind yourselves of what that is, you may. Hebrews chapter 1:1 tells us what faith means and what faith is. But I was curious to know, what would Google say? What is the definition of faith? So I looked it up, and it said, faith is having complete trust. Completeness. Nothing missing, no parts gone. Nothing wavering, it's complete. Complete trust. Do you think complete trust comes into play in rock climbing? Yeah. Oh, yes, it does. Does complete trust come into play in our spiritual lives, in our relationship with Jesus? If we are going to be successful, if we are going to be fully enveloped in Jesus' love, we have to have complete trust in Him. If we're trying to go back and forth and waver between trust in ourselves, trust in worldly things, we're not going to have that faith that we need. The trust fall. After everybody did the trust fall, the facilitator at this activity asked each of the Pathfinders, I want you to share something with each person here that maybe you're embarrassed of, or maybe that you're ashamed that you've done. And it was to get the kids to open up and have trust with each other. And then she asked another question. She said, now I want you to share something that you are proud of that you can do, something that you're good at, that you think that you are well known for. And for some of the Pathfinders, that was actually harder. Developing trust, that was important because the lives of each other depend on one another in the sport of rock climbing. And our lives depend on Jesus. Here is Daniela learning to rappel. The rappelling station was something we learned. They didn't start off like this, okay? I don't actually have the picture of them learning, but we started in a controlled manner where it was a sloped setting, and you slowly let yourself down. In a rappel, you are connected to the harness by a device that can let the rope out, but it's creating friction so that friction goes through the rope slowly. And now one hand is out in front of you, the other hand is behind you holding the rope coming through the device, and that is your brake. And so as you go down, you let the rope slide through your hand. Now in the movies, they may show these dramatic leaps off the rock, falling 20 feet at a time. That's not what we were teaching the Pathfinders here. That's hard on your equipment, and it can be dangerous as well. In this setting, where our Pathfinders were rappelling, we had them double roped. So every Pathfinder that went down was in a belayed rope, and they had a staff member belaying them, as well as a second rope in which the pathfinder was in control of. That's the rappel rope. Okay? So if anything happened, they panicked, they forgot what they were supposed to do, they let go of their rope, we had them safely on the belay rope. And if they wanted to go faster than we wanted them to go, they could not, because they only went as fast as the belayer let the rope out. But there is something with the rappelling that was hard for some. You have to trust your own abilities, because you're letting yourself out. One pathfinder got to the edge, she looked behind her and said, "Not going to do that." Now, the pathfinders are down below encouraging her, "You can do it, you can do it, you're fine, you can do this." The people up on top are encouraging, "You can do this, you're going to be okay, you got this." She went back a little bit further, started to lean on that rope, but you have to give all your trust into that rope, that it's going to hold you. She couldn't do it, and she went back up. This rappel was a favorite. These are two of our pathfinders, Basti and Elizabeth, here going over the edge of about a 100-foot rappel. And once they got off that ledge, that rock is actually overhanging, so they were free for all. Feet are not against the rock, they're just lowering themselves down on the rope, and by the time they're at the bottom, they're about 15, 20 feet off the rock. So this rappel was definitely a favorite. I think this picture is pretty cool. I had to get into the action as well. That's me coming off the edge of the rappel, and this is the first time I've ever taken a selfie while rappelling. I kept one hand on the brake rope and the other hand on my camera, and what if I dropped the camera? Yeah, that would have been bad. So I'm probably about 80 feet off the ground there. The people look pretty small down below me. The next thing that the pathfinders learned was knots. They had to learn several different knots to be able to climb and to earn the honor. One of those knots is the prusik knot, and it's using for ascending a rope. When the rope is hanging off straight down, you don't have holds to hang on to. Maybe it's an overhang. Your rope is tied, anchored in at the top. You can see some bolts up there. That's what we call top roping. It's through these bolts and chains that are bolted into the rock. Some of our other anchors were set up around pieces of rock or trees that's at the top, and the pathfinders had to learn how to set their anchors. But this one here is where they created two knots on the rope, two prusik knots, with a loop at the end. And you can see here our pathfinders' feet, their feet are in this loop, and then the knots are on their climbing rope. So they put their weight on one while they slide the other knot up. And when the prusik knot is designed to, when there's weight on it, it puts tension, it locks onto the climbing rope. But when you release that tension, it can slide like a slip knot. So it's a very useful knot. So when they put tension and weight on it, it locks onto that climbing rope, and they can actually stand there and jump on it. But what they have to do then for the honor is to ascend 50 feet using a prusik knot. And all three of these girls are our pathfinders, Caitlin, Michiko, and Nellie. They're ascending there in front of what they nicknamed Pack Rat Cave. It was a little bit smelly if you went inside. But this was fun, and it is a little bit hard for some of the pathfinders because you have to use strength. You have to be able to put all your weight on your legs and then push that up, and then put all your weight on the next foot and push the next knot up. For some of them, it was like nothing. They went right up. That's the prusik knot. Oh, you already saw that. Another station they went to, they had to learn about the gear, the harness, the helmet, the belay devices. What does a figure eight do? What does an ATC do? An ATC stands for air traffic control. And that is the main rappelling device and belay device that they used on our trip was the ATC, but you can also use a figure 8. You can also use a gris-gris. There are several others as well. Here, this gentleman is showing our pathfinders different equipment for anchoring to the rock. Behind his helmet there is what's called a cam. It's very small, but the locking cam, if you pull the handle on the cam, it gets smaller. You can stick it in the rock, and when you let go of the little handle, it expands. And then you can lock your carabiner in and hook your rope to it and be safe as you're climbing. Now, of course, when you put your device in the rock, you've got to test it. You've got to test it to make sure it's strong and it's going to hold, so you can yank on it. You can put your weight on it a little bit. That's what he showed the pathfinders too. And then they gave them blocks and nuts, and they're different shapes of metal with a little loop of rope on it that you would hook your rope to, your climbing rope. So the pathfinders had to go up to the rock and find different cracks that they could put their device into that would hold them. That brings me to a spiritual lesson. Being anchored to the rock. Who is our rock? Jesus is our rock. We want to be anchored to Him. If we're not anchored to Him, we're in trouble, my friends. Isn't that right? And when we anchor, is it appropriate that we test it? Did you know that that's like the number one way to grow our faith in Jesus is to test it? Test our faith. Will it hold? How do we test our faith? Do you give Jesus an opportunity to grow your faith? Do you test Him? Something to think about. Anchored to Jesus. Make sure that anchor holds. Something that they really stress is not just having one anchor. They recommended at least 3 anchors. And as you set up your line through these anchors at the top of the rock, you want to make sure they're pulling equally on those anchors. So not all the stress, if there's a slip and a fall, not all the stress of your fall goes onto one anchor, because that could pull out. But that the stress is equally distributed between all those anchors. Something important to think about. That brings me to the rock. This was Sunday morning. The sun's come up in the east. The shadows are laying to the west. You can see the pathfinders spread out there. They have 5 routes set up on this rock wall. The pathfinders, one of their stations on Sabbath was to learn about the rock. And what they told us was there are different styles of holds that you're looking for. Now, the big bucket holds, of course, are everybody's favorite, but that's easy. You can find a big hold and get half your foot into it. You can walk up like a ladder. And now in rock climbing, there is a scale rating as well. If we were hiking down a level path, that's a level 1. And it goes up from there, steeper and steeper, until you get a vertical wall is a level 5. And then the rating goes up from there. If there's big holds, you're a 5.3, a 5.4. The holds get smaller until you're just putting your fingers on the ledge and you're at a 5.10, 5.11. And then from there, it can get up to 5.16. We didn't do that. But the pathfinders here, they said these routes were between 5.5 and 5.8 that they were climbing on. And they were taught to look for the holds. Where can their hands go? Where can their feet go? Reaching up and looking how to use the rock climbing the shoe. The rock climbing shoe is made of a very sticky rubber. And that rubber can be smeared out onto just a little bit of a lip on the rock, and you can actually hold yourself to the rock that way. Now, it was hard for our pathfinders when they were learning this to actually use the shoe. It's hard to, put your weight on something when you don't feel like you have a solid step. The other challenge, and I'm going to draw a spiritual lesson from this, is when you are on the rock, you're here. Amen. The rock is here. You're facing the rock. You can't see. So you can rely on people down below you. Your belayer is off the rock looking up. And many, many times I'd hear the belayer calling out to the pathfinder on the wall, "Move your right foot up. There's a good handhold to your left. Move your left hand up a little bit higher, a little bit more to your left. Okay, now can you put your left foot up? Lift your knee." They're giving directions. Do we rely on our belayer, Jesus, for directions? Sometimes we're faced with situations where we're blinded. All we can see is right in front of us. But there may be a way out. There may be a handhold, something that can help us. But we just can't see it. But if we ask Him, He can show us where it is. Too fast. Here's looking down at the pathfinders below. This is from the rock above. Brian, is that you there practicing your belay? Maybe? Okay. You can see here how we have our anchor set up with multiple ropes going up. So all the pathfinders did have to learn how to belay from the base. We also had a backup belayer, a buddy belayer, in case for some reason the person let go. When you're belaying, you never let go of that rope. And I'll talk more about belaying in just a minute. But this person here is holding the rope for the person belaying for this person who's climbing that you can barely see on the rock. So there was always a backup. Backup plans are good. Here's our pathfinder, Brian, practicing looking for those holds. You can see his foot here. When you see his foot, you can see almost the full shadow of his shoe, which means there's not much rock that he's putting his foot on. It's just a little tiny lip in the rock that he's got his big toe on, but that shoe is holding him there. And as the pathfinders climb and as they get more fatigued, you can see muscles start to shake a little bit, get a little bit more nervous. Arms get tired, fingers get tired. You may get some abrasions on your fingers or elbows from the rock. But yes, it's fun. It's rewarding. Here's another climber. If we weren't on the rock, that background picture is the meadow that we walked through to get to the rock. It was beautiful. The wildflowers were out. Here's Michigo practicing. You can see it's pretty steep what they're climbing. Not a lot of handholds. Our pathfinders were looking for little lips in the rock, little cracks like this where they could get fingers into or maybe jam their knuckles or their fist into to give them something to step on. They learned how to find a chimney in the rock where there may be two sections of rock together and they can put hands or feet braced out to the sides to give them enough friction to move up the rock face. Oh, this picture. So I got to explain a little bit. That's that rock face that we saw earlier in the picture. But they set up another fantastic rappel and a climb. So here at the top, you follow my red dot? This is where our belayer is. He's set up at the top to belay a rappel person. So a pathfinder here hooks up, climbs up to him on their belay rope, so they're safe. Then they're going to hook into a second rope, which is the rappel rope. Then they will rappel all the way down, and below here is the lake surface. And if you look very closely, right there in blue is Daniela coming up from the bottom of that route. It was pretty spectacular. There she is, coming up from the water. So they had to rappel down almost to the water, come off the rappel, rely only on their belay rope, and climb back up to get out of there. So I like this route because you had kids that, could go further. They could do it, but, they're just tired. Kids, some of our teens these days, they kind of get that attitude sometimes where, no, I just give up. No, I can't do it. It's not for me today. I'm sorry. And we do. We had some of those kids there. Daniela was not one of them. But on this route, you got down there, the only way up is to climb. We had no boat down here. The water this time of year is very cold. There was no way out of that except to climb up the rope. So, I liked that. This is what the view was like. So I did take a picture. I did this rappel. If Danielle is coming up there, one of the climbers, that's what they would see coming up about halfway up underneath that ledge. They would look up at their belayer up top. Another one of our pathfinders doing that rappel that I just showed you. That's Alex. Beautiful view overlooking the lake. Brings me to the belay. Before I go on to the belay, I'd like to remind you of today's scripture. In Psalm 9, verse 10, New King James Version, "The Lord also be a refuge for the oppressed, a refuge in times of trouble." That's my lead up in verse 9. In verse 10, it says, "And those who know your name will put your trust in you. For you, Lord, have not forsaken those who seek you." Those who know your name will put their trust in you. Amen. We had to have full trust in the belay person. Full trust. And so we practiced this not on the steep rock. This was an actual climb that Caitlin and Michigo are doing here, but we practiced in a controlled setting where it was not real steep, and each pathfinder had to learn to belay. And the commands that they learn are here. I didn't put a question mark there, but the first question is from the climber. So if Caitlin here in this picture is the climber, she would ask Michigo on belay. It's like question. This puts the climber in control. On belay. If the belayer is ready, they respond, belay is on. Then there's a second question. Climbing, asking, is it okay to climb? If the belayer is all checked out, have checked, double-checked the harness of their climber, checked their own harness, the devices are locked in, carabiners are locked, everything's safe, then, helmets, don't forget helmets, the belayer will say, climb on. And then they're free to climb. Once on the wall, there are a couple commands that they can use. Tension means they're in a scary situation. They're slipping. They want the rope tighter. Or maybe they're going to make a move and reach for a rock, and they say, tension, please. Or maybe they're to a point where they couldn't find a hold above them, but they see a hold over there, and they need a little bit of slack in the rope. The climber can call for slack, and the belayer will give them a little bit of slack. The last command there is at the top of the route. Either they got to the top, successfully climbed the route, or the climber has gone partway up and said, you know what, I've had enough. I'm too tired. The command they give then is take. That means that they want their belayer to be totally in control of the rope, and they're letting go of the rock. One of my favorite verses is Joshua 1:9. Have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous? Do not be terrified, do not be discouraged, for the Lord thy God will be with you wherever you go. He will be with you wherever you go. When the pathfinders would get to the top of that rock, when you're climbing, and an easier route it is, it's a bit like a ladder. You've got steps, you've got handholds, it's just hand over hand going up. Harder routes take more finesse and stress and time. But when they get to the top and they're ready to be done, they have to completely let go. There's no longer just hanging onto the rock with one hand. There's no longer keeping your feet against the rock in that good foothold. You have to give full control over to the person holding the rope. If we're tied into Jesus and we give Him full control, are we willing to let go and say, "Take me, Jesus"? Another favorite verse is Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, and I think it applies here as well. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge Him, and He will direct thy paths. In the belay situation, is the climber acknowledging the belayer? Who initiates this relationship between the belayer and the climber? The climber does. They're the ones that asks. In our relationship with Jesus, He doesn't force us into that relationship. He's there. He's ready. Amen. He's ready, but He's waiting for us to say, "Are you there? God, are you there? God, I'm ready for you to take me." There's no pressure on His part. He's just waiting for us to ask so that He can respond. And if we need tension, if we need help, He's there. If we feel like, maybe, God, I need some breathing room, I need some slack, He gives us slack. He may not want to, but He gives it to us because we're in control of the relationship. Sometimes that's hard for us to understand. God is in control of the big picture, but we are in control of that relationship. If we were not in control, there wouldn't be a free will. That free will puts us in control of the relationship. And Jesus is just waiting for us to give Him the call. I think of a story in Joshua chapter 7. And as I was thinking about this, I kind of reflected my thoughts on how this relationship works. So in Joshua chapter 7, you can turn there and review over it. I'll just kind of skip over the story a little bit. You've just had in Joshua chapter 6 the destruction of Jericho. Right? You know how that went. And Joshua consulted God about every move to make, and God gave him specific instructions to take. He did it. Success. Victory was won, and it was time to move on to the next city. Now, the Bible doesn't give us. It goes right into chapter 7, what had happened, and it doesn't say that Joshua consulted God. It just says in verse 2 there, "Now Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai. Go up and spy on the country." So the men went up and spied out Ai. And what they'd say, they came back and they said, "Oh, it's a small town, no problem, we can take it." But maybe he did, but the Bible doesn't say it, that Joshua never consulted with God about this specific decision. He sent the spies out. If Joshua had consulted him, God would have said, "No, something's not right in the camp, don't go." When our pathfinders are on this wall, if the climber says, "On belay," and the belayer is not hooked up with their carabiner locked, the belayer will say, "Stop, no, don't go, you are not safe." Joshua didn't get the go-ahead from God, and things weren't right. And Israel ran away with their tails between their legs, defeated. And then Joshua came back and consulted. But that consultation, asking Jesus, "Am I safe to go?" I think that's That's an incredible lesson for each one of us. Asking Him before we do anything, am I safe to go? And not only asking once, but like in the lesson of rock climbing here, we have a double check. On belay, everything's checked out. Belay is on. Climbing, one more time, check everything out. Knots. The carabiner's locked. Harness is clipped. Everything's buckled. Helmet's on. Everything's safe. Climb on. Check with Him before you make a decision. Climbers, well, they needed some food just like us as Christians. We need spiritual food. And in the climb of life, we need energy, we need strength. And in the climbing at the rock walls, the Pathfinders needed lunch, and they packed their own sack lunches both days that we were out there. Here's our Pathfinder stopping for lunch to gain some strength before they took on more challenges. Beautiful view overlooking the lake. If you'll notice here on Ariana's neck is a rope with a little card. That card was their climbing pass. And the procedures were that they had to learn a knot. We learned a knot. It's tied there at the back of her neck. And they had to keep that with them all weekend. If they did not have their climbing pass with them, they couldn't climb, and they couldn't participate in the activity. And if they were messing around, horseplay, they would get their climbing pass pulled, and they would no longer be able to climb. So they took it very seriously. The kids had a lot of fun, they learned a lot, and I don't believe any of the Pathfinders got their passes pulled. But in the past, it has had to happen. Where they're warned, and they don't take it seriously, and they're messing around, their pass gets yanked, and their climbing experience is done for the weekend, because they want the kids to be safe. This is the closest I have to a full group picture. It shows 7 of our Pathfinders there. They were all going different directions to different stations. So at the beginning, I shared with you the title, Take Me, Jesus. And I had one of my kids ask me, why do you have that comma there, Take Me, Jesus? Because I wanted to separate it. That's my command. Take me, Jesus. And in that respect, when I say that, take me, Jesus, I'm letting go of everything. Just as a climber would let completely go of the rock, put all their faith, all their trust, complete trust in that rope of the belayer that's connected to the belayer's harness, we need to let go and say, Jesus, take me. My faith is in you alone. We can't still be connected to things of this world. Maybe there's something that's holding us back. Is it something that we feel we can't ask forgiveness for? Is there mistakes we made in our lives that we're just not ready to admit? Maybe there's some bad habits that just are tying us to the rock. But if we want to be taken by Jesus, we have to let go completely. We can't be hanging on with 2 fingers. We can't still have a foot and a foothold. We've got to let go completely, lean back, and let Jesus have control of our lives. Amen? Amen? Jesus will never fail us. He's always paying attention. You see, in rock climbing, there can be human error. You can have a belayer who's visiting with a friend. That's why we had backup belayers, and we trained them. You have to focus on your climber. Your hand never leaves that rope. We train them, but they are humans. There can be human error. For example, I first got into rock climbing when I was in high school. I earned my Pathfinder honor at 16. I applied for a staff position at Camp Mivett in the summer I turned 18. And they looked at my resume and they said, oh, you've been a Pathfinder? Oh, you have your rock climbing honor. Okay, you're going to be our rock climbing instructor. I said, wait, I don't know if I'm ready for that. And they said, no, you can do it. And so, I was a rock climbing instructor. I got to set up my own routes on the wall. They had a 30-foot rock climbing wall there. Camp Maivaden now has a much nicer wall than what I had back in those days. But I set up my own routes, and I went through the books, and I talked to people who knew more information than I do, and I learned how to be able to teach the rock climbing class. 1 week at junior camp, I was teaching my junior campers, and it was a smaller group of boys that were in my rock climbing class, and I got kind of tired of just letting them climb up and down the wall, and after I taught all the lessons, it was near the end of the week, I said to them, hey guys, how about you buddy belay me? Junior campers. My son is a junior camper. Have you seen him stand next to me? Just think about that. But through my mind was if they were buddy belaying me and they're all together, well, they should be able to do it, okay? So I found the biggest boy, put the harness on him, the belay device and everything on him. Then I had the other boys stand behind him holding the rope just in case it slipped out a little too fast. What could go wrong? I got like 3 backups. So I climbed up the wall. I got to the top and I said, okay, boys, you ready? Yes, we're ready, Mr. Meharry. Are you sure? Yep. I checked their hands down there. Yep, they're good. I let go. Take. I lean back. I'm not going anywhere. Boys, I'm ready. Take. I'm not going anywhere. I got all my weight on the rope and I'm just sitting there. I said, boys, you got to let out a little bit. I'm not going anywhere. Boys, slowly let go of the rope. And they listened that time. Every single one of them all let go of the rope. And down I went very quickly. With my rapid descent, I was grabbing for rock holds on the wall or trying to grab the rope in front of me, anything. I got a bad rope burn up my arm. Fortunately for me, they decided that that would be a bad end to their instructor, so they quickly grabbed the rope, and I stopped about 4 feet off the ground. But I learned my lesson that day about complete trust. I trusted those boys, and I may trust them again, but that complete trust, do I have faith in them that they will not make a mistake? I don't. But with Jesus, we can. Amen. He will never fail us. We can have complete trust. We can put our faith in Jesus.